people come into think tanks with many different skills. Some of them are economists, some of them are sociologists or political scientists, some work on Africa, some work on Latin America, they have different topic specialities. But there's a thread running through everything they do, which is the set of skills which are specific to working in a think tank. I'm Simon Maxwell, I'm British, I work in international development and I have a long history of work in think tanks and on the board of research institutes and think tanks. Working in a think tank is not the same as working in a government department or a university department or a research institute. The thing that distinguishes a think tank, it's its commitment to understanding policy and informing better policy and changing policy, and by dint of changing policy, changing the world and making the world a better place. So what are those core skills that are needed? And there are lots of different ways to cut the cake and lots of different ways of explaining this. I tried to do it by using 4 images that I would give to new staff members when they join the organisation. And the first image is of Scheherazade. Scheherazade is the inspiration of the tales of the Arabian Nights. She lived in the palace where the Sultan had decided to marry a different girl every night and in the morning cut her head off. Scheherazade's father is the Grand Vizier. She says to her father, "I can solve this problem, father, if you let me marry the Sultan." Of course, he's horrified, but eventually she does marry the Sultan, and she tells him an amazing story which doesn't quite finish when dawn comes, so he has to keep her alive for the next day, and so on for the rest of their lives. And in the end, she becomes a very accomplished storyteller, and he allows her to live, and they live happily and have many children together. Key point, Scheherazade is a storyteller. People in think tanks need to be able to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's kind of the elevator pitch you might give to the minister as you're riding up in the lift. You have to be able to describe and explain the world and offer solutions. Often as researchers, that's one of the hardest things for us, is to come to a set view on how the world is. The second one is Paul Revere famously raised the militia against the British in Boston in 1775, I think, and went round the villages shouting, "The British are coming," and raised the militia which defeated the British. What isn't so often talked about is that on the same night somebody else went out around the villages to try and raise the militia and was sadly unsuccessful. That person was William Dawes. And why did Paul Revere succeed and William Dawes not succeed? The answer is that Paul Revere was very well connected. He was a pewter smith in Boston and was on all the local committees for improvement of the town and so on. And so people knew him. He was well networked. Think tanks are often much more successful when they're well networked. You want the minister picking up the phone not to the other think tank down the road, but to your think tank. And the point is that networks don't just happen. That you can't just switch on your computer and find a network, you have to build it. You have to invest in meeting people and helping them and talking to them and getting to know what their priorities are. So that's the second role model. The third role model is the famous engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Isambard Kingdom Brunel built railways, steamships, iron bridges and so on, was a tremendous innovator, if you like, a researcher, with lots of theory behind him, but somebody who tried to deliver change on the ground. Those railways and ships and bridges are concrete expressions of applied research. And sometimes in academia, we think that having ideas on their own is enough to change the world, but no, they have to be embedded in real change. And that's why people in think tanks need to work side by side with people who are actually doing things on the ground, with government departments, for example, with the private sector, with NGOs. And sometimes people are rather snooty about think tanks that take money for commission studies or even consultancy work. And I don't agree with that. I think that you learn a lot, but you also contribute very practically if you do that kind of work. And the fourth role model is Rasputin, the famously political and devious advisor to the Russian leadership. And we also need to think, as he did, politically, about what is the political process that we want to try and inform and engage with, who are the players, what are their interests, and how do we best weave our way through this complex, difficult jungle of policy formation. So if you take those four together as the core skills, you're then left with some questions you have to ask, and I summarize them as follows. Who is making what decision? When are they making it? What product do you need to influence the decision, and when do you need it? The who is about the policy makers, who may be political or they may be governmental, civil servants. The what decision are they making is about what kinds of international conferences or national policy making processes they're involved in. When are they making it emphasizes the importance of timing. No point in having a brilliant policy recommendation if it comes 24 hours after, if it comes 24 hours after the decision has been made. So who is making what decision? When are they making it? What product do you need to influence the decision is important. Sometimes it's a book, sometimes it's a policy brief, sometimes it's a video, sometimes it's a series of tweets. Sometimes, you know what, it's going out to have coffee or lunch with somebody, because that's the way you can put across your message, your story, in the best possible way. So who's making what decision? When are they making it? What product do you need, and when do you need it? Timeliness is next to godliness in this scenario. You know, these are all obvious things about working in a think tank environment, but unless we take them out and look at them one by one and think seriously about them, then it becomes very easy to forget them. There are lots of formal models that do this. For example, the International Food Policy Research Institute has a very good policy analysis model. The ODI in London, the Overseas Development Institute, pioneered the Roma Toolkit, which is about how to bridge research and policy. And I really strongly recommend people to go and look at those very practical toolkits for ideas. And there's one additional thing to add, which is for those of us who work in international development, many of the topics we work on are global or transnational in character. Global warming, an obvious example, conflict very often, international monetary policy, international trade policy. And the great risk there, I think, is that each think tank works independently of all the others. And therefore you get a cacophony of voices at international level with very little coherence between them. So here's the final thing that I often say to people when I'm talking about work in a think tank. We need to build partnerships with others. And the model that I've always tried to adopt is based on the idea of collaborative competition. We don't want to merge think tanks. I'm not terribly in favor of think tanks having brass plates, offices in many different countries. I'd prefer our partnerships to be with think tanks which are locally embedded and are working in their countries of origin. But what we can form are collaborations between them, think tank alliances, where clearly if we all speak together, we are stronger than if we speak separately. And an example of that is the European Think Tanks group, which I helped to create back maybe 10 years ago now. Think tanks in 5 countries working together, trying to speak with one voice, each maintaining their own program and their diversity, but thinking about the big policy questions they work on, and then trying to catapult each other into a position of prominence and influence policy in that way. And of course, it's always the case that we're going to be stronger together than we are apart. So all these things I've talked about, the role models embedded in a serious policy-making framework, who's making what decision, when are they making it, and so on, and the idea of working with others in the think tank alliance, all those are part of what we need to do if we're to translate ourselves, to leap from being, I was going to say mere researchers, but to leap from being researchers or academics into that world of policy and policy making, and to do it carefully, to do it in such a way that we don't sacrifice our independence, we don't become tagged as people who don't have a research base but are just speaking out on issues. For example, we're very careful about advocacy. We try not to present ourselves as advocacy organisations. We're not campaigning organisations. We're in that very, very carefully defined and often quite specific niche between research on the one hand and policy on the other, leaving to others the job of marching in the streets and campaigning, ensuring always that we're kind of analytical, research-based, and telling stories which help policymakers to make better policy.